Medieval Europe built its world on oaths to kings, to God, and inside the home, to one spouse. And while men could wander, fail, or sin without losing their place in society, a woman accused of adultery carried a burden far heavier than her own actions. To be labeled unfaithful was not just a moral stain. It was a crime, a scandal, and a public spectacle waiting to happen. What mattered wasn't the truth. What mattered was the accusation. Within villages, inside small churches, and behind heavy wooden doors, husbands, priests, and local courts decided the fate of women, whose lives could be destroyed in a single breath. Sometimes the accusation came from a husband seeking control, sometimes from neighbors craving gossip, sometimes from community leaders eager to make an example. Before continuing, I invite you to share something with me in the comments. From which part of the world are you watching this video? Your presence helps bring forgotten history into the light. The moment a woman was suspected, everything changed. She might be locked indoors, questioned by the village priest, or dragged before the church court. The church claimed to protect morality, but its judgments were often shaped by fear, superstition, and the belief that a woman's body belonged not to herself, but to her husband and to God. The harshest punishments did not begin in stone keeps or royal halls. They began in the village square, where public shame served as both warning and entertainment. Crowds gathered not for justice, but for humiliation. If a woman denied the accusation, the people claimed she was lying. If she cried, they said tears were proof of guilt. And if she remained silent, they whispered that only a sinner would refuse to speak in her own defense. Shame was the first weapon. Before physical punishment came public degradation. Rituals designed to destroy a woman's standing in the community. One of the most common was forced parading. A woman might be stripped to her shift, marched through the village, and mocked by neighbors who had known her since childhood. Children were encouraged to jeer. Adults spat insults. Her dignity was treated as something disposable, something the entire community could tear apart. Another punishment was the scold's bridle, a metal cage locked around the head, fitted with a spike bit pressed against the tongue. Officially, it was for scolding or gossip, but in many regions, it became a tool to silence accused wives. The message was unmistakable. A woman's voice had no authority over the village, the marriage, or her own body. But public humiliation was only the beginning. In parts of Germany, France, and Italy, courts employed the ordeal, a deadly test that claimed to reveal God's judgment. If a woman maintained her innocence, she might be forced to plunge her arm into boiling water or carry burning iron. If her burns healed cleanly, she was declared pure. If they festered, she was condemned. The test was impossible to pass, but the church insisted God would protect the innocent. Of course, most victims were declared guilty. Then came punishments far more violent. While men caught committing adultery often paid fines or completed periods of penance, women were sentenced to beatings, imprisonment, or whipping along the town's main roads. Some were tied to carts and dragged for miles. Others were forced to kneel in public chapels for days, praying aloud while villagers walked around them like they were pests, not people. One of the most feared procedures was the cold water trial, widely used across England, France, and the Low Countries. The woman would be tied with rope and lowered into a river or lake. If she floated, she was condemned. Floating meant the water rejected her sinful body. If she sank, she might be declared innocent. But many drowned before the rope could be pulled back. The irony was cruel. Innocence could kill you just as surely as guilt. And if the woman survived all of this, the damage was permanent. The stain of suspicion never faded. Neighbors remembered. Family members whispered. Husbands used it to control. A single accusation could steal a lifetime of respectability. But medieval punishments were not merely social or symbolic. Some women faced physical mutilation, sanctioned by local laws and carried out without hesitation. In certain regions of Italy, France, and Eastern Europe, a woman convicted of adultery could have her hair shaved off, her nose cut, or her ears mutilated, marking her forever as a fallen woman. It did not matter whether she had truly committed adultery or had simply angered the wrong people. The law was not blind. It was pointed, and its blade fell almost entirely on women. In noble households, the stakes were even higher. Noble women who produced heirs were watched closely. If a husband suspected that a child might not be his, a woman could face confinement, starvation, or even death without any formal trial. She was expected to maintain purity, loyalty, and silence, even when her own husband did not. Some noblemen locked their wives in towers, forbade them from speaking to male servants, or demanded constant surveillance. But in peasant villages, the reality was different, and in some ways worse. A peasant woman had no wealth, no status, and no influence. She relied on communal acceptance for survival. Losing her reputation meant losing everything: her home, her protection, her livelihood. Some women were banished from their villages, forced to wander from town to town carrying the shame of an accusation they could never erase. Across Europe, the enforcement of these punishments varied. In England, church courts handled many accusations but offered little mercy. In Germany, local councils took matters into their own hands. In France, the punishments shifted from region to region, often influenced by local customs rather than written law. In Spain, strict morality codes shaped by both church and monarchy made suspicion alone a deadly burden, yet the pattern remained the same. When a woman was accused, she became powerless. Husbands used accusations to gain advantage. Priests used them to assert moral authority. Communities used them to reinforce obedience. And at the center of it all stood the accused wife, terrified, humiliated, and without a voice. And the darkest punishments, the ones whispered about but rarely written in official records, remained to be uncovered. What happened after a woman was declared guilty was not merely punishment, it was erasure. Medieval Europe believed that the honor of a household belonged entirely to the husband, and so the punishment of an accused wife became a performance meant to restore his pride in her expense. That belief created some of the most terrifying penalties ever written into local custom. One of the most humiliating was the bridal chair, used across parts of Germany and Central Europe. It was a heavy wooden seat lifted above the crowd. The accused woman was tied down, sometimes forced to wear a crude sign declaring her a faithless wife, while neighbors threw refuse, rotten vegetables, and even stones. The goal wasn't justice. It was spectacle, the transformation of her suffering into entertainment. Medieval courts believed humiliation could cleanse dishonor. In reality, it stripped women of their humanity, leaving them marked for life. Some regions preferred harsher methods. In parts of Italy and the Germanic states, convicted women were forced into the pillory, a wooden frame that locked the neck and wrists. Hours became unbearable as crowds mocked, slapped, and kicked the restrained victim. Children were encouraged to participate, believing they were defending morality. Adults took the chance to settle old grudges under the guise of righteousness. For many women, the pillory was more dangerous than any official sentence. A mob could turn deadly in minutes, and authorities rarely intervened. As long as no one could be blamed, a woman's death in the pillory was simply considered the will of the crowd. But even the pillory was mild compared to punishments in regions where the church held absolute authority. In parts of France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, women were sentenced to ritualized penance, barefoot processions in winter, kneeling for hours on stone floors, holding candles until their hands blistered, or confessing sins they had never committed simply to survive. And then came the brutal truth almost no medieval chronicler dared to record. For many women, the greatest danger wasn't the court, it was the husband. Medieval marriage law gave men terrifying power. A husband could beat an unfaithful wife. He could confine her. He could starve her to force a confession. In some regions, he could legally kill her. His word carried more weight than hers, even when there was no evidence, no witnesses, and no crime. If a husband claimed that his wife had betrayed him, that alone could condemn her. If he accused another man of being involved, Both could be punished, even executed, without proof. This wasn't justice, it was sanctioned cruelty. In towns across Europe, another punishment emerged: ducking. A wooden chair attached to a long arm stretched over a river or pond. The accused woman was tied in, swung out over the water, and dropped repeatedly until she gasped, choked, or fainted. Ducking, like the cold water trials, was meant to purify her, but its real purpose was to break her spirit in front of the entire community. Some women never resurfaced, yet the darkest of all punishments awaited women whose marriages held political or economic importance. Noble husbands seeking to protect inheritance could make an accusation of adultery disappear into private chambers where no witnesses entered and no record survived. Chronicles speak in vague lines, hints of disappearances, veiled references to secret imprisonments, and whispers that some noble women died of sorrow or faded away. Behind these phrases lurk starvation, isolation, and slow, deliberate cruelty hidden from public sight. And still, not all punishments left visible scars. Social death was often the most devastating sentence. An accused wife could be expelled from her home, her children taken from her, her dowry seized. She might live the rest of her life as a wanderer, begging from village to village, carrying the brand of shame like a permanent mark. Medieval Europe believed reputation was moral truth, and once a woman's reputation was shattered, it was considered proof that she deserved her fate. This is the part history rarely acknowledges. Thousands of women lived and died under punishments that were never recorded because their suffering was considered ordinary. They were not royalty. They were not saints. They were simply wives living in a world where their silence was demanded, their obedience expected, and their suffering overlooked. But despite all of this, some women resisted. Some appealed to higher courts. Some sought protection from powerful relatives or sympathetic priests. Some fled their villages and built new lives. And some, though very few, fought back openly, challenging husbands, challenging priests, challenging the very laws that condemned them. Their names are mostly lost. Their stories survive only in fragments, but they prove that even in the darkest corners of medieval justice, there were moments of defiance, small, fragile acts of courage against overwhelming cruelty. And that is why these histories matter. Not to shock, not to sensationalize, but to remember. Because every punishment described in this story was considered normal, even righteous, by the societies that enforced them. It took centuries for the world to abandon these beliefs, and in many parts of the world, echoes of these punishments still survive today in different forms. Shame. Control. Violence disguised as morality. History is not dead. It lingers in the structures we inherit and the customs we ignore. And when we revisit these forgotten stories, we are not reopening wounds. We are learning how they were inflicted in the first place. Thank you for watching to the end. If you want more deep dives into the darkest corners of human history and the untold stories of those who suffered in silence, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. And tell me in the comments which hidden chapter of history you want to uncover next. Their stories were almost erased, but together, we bring them back into the light.